Good morning, everyone, and welcome. We're here this morning for our press conference to address current matters relating to crime in Barbados. We have with us this morning the Attorney General of Barbados, Mr. Dale Marshall. We also have the Commissioner of Police, Mr. Richard Boyce, and we also have in attendance Senior Superintendent of Police, Mr. David Griffith. We remind all those present to please silence your phones, and there will be a question and answer segment at the end. Please, when you address the Attorney General or anyone, state your name and where you're from. Over to you, AG.
Thank you very much. Good morning to the members of the media, and good morning, Barbados, all of you who are joining us, whether on television or through other means. I think you're all aware that the country has experienced a spike in the number of firearm events or incidents over the past few weeks. These have resulted in a number of deaths and injuries. Other incidents not connected with the use of firearms, but also resulting in the loss of life, have also occurred. These are all tragic circumstances and acutely felt in a small country such as ours, such that because of our size, many of us may know the families who have suffered loss. The Prime Minister has already spoken on behalf of the government, but I too wish to commiserate with all of those who have been personally affected. You will note that I have referred to this increase in firearm crime as a spike. I use this term deliberately because that is exactly what it is, a sharp increase in numbers over a short period of time. This is not an indication that Barbados has descended into a state of chaos or outright lawlessness. We have dealt with spikes in crime before, and effectively so. Crime as a whole is always a source of great concern, but firearm-enabled crimes are of particular concern to the Barbadian public because of the fear that this kind of crime engenders across our communities. Government is not unmindful about the disquiet this continues to generate. And so this morning I'm going to try to contextualize the issue, highlight what some of these main issues are, and outline what the government is doing to address the matter. But before proceeding to do that, let me provide a synopsis of the statistics relating to murders and firearms that have been provided to me by the Barbados Police Service. This is not a numbers exercise, but it's important that you understand what we're dealing with as a whole. I start with murders. In 2017, we had 30 murders. 23 of that 30 was by use of firearms. In 2018, we had 28 murders. 18 of those were by use of firearms. In 2019, we had a whopping 48 murders, and 30 of those were by use of firearms. In 2020, we began to see some decline. We had 41 murders, 26 by use of firearms. Last year, 2021, we had 32 murders, 17 of those were by firearms. So far for the year, we've had 17 murders, and 12 of those murders were by use of firearms. But it's important as we talk about the murders that we've suffered as a country, that we connect this to what the police force and how the police force has been dealing with it. So I want to speak briefly about what the police officers call their clearance rate. And I think the title will help you to immediately understand what we're talking about. And I go back to the same 2017. In 2017, of those 30 murders, 16 have been solved so far. In 2019, of the 28 murders, 19 have been solved. That 19 amounts to 68%. In 2019, 27 of the 48 murders reported were solved. That's 56%. Of the 41 murders committed in 2020, 26, or 63%, have been solved. In 2021, 23, or 72%, of the 32 murders were solved. And for this year, of the 17 murders thus far, 10 have been cleared up. And some of those have only happened in the last few weeks. And I'm informed by our statisticians that the clearance rates that I've just indicated to you compare very favorably with rates in the developed world, in countries that have far, far more resources available to them than we do. And Commissioner, this speaks volumes about the quality of your policing in Barbados, that you are able to maintain and to reach a world-class clearance rate in relation to murders. But what is also important to know is that the as yet unsolved murders, those that have not been cleared up, they are all still very much under investigation. And therefore, we expect that these clearance rates that I've just indicated to you will inevitably go up with the passage of time. These cases are not treated as cold cases. They're still all actively being addressed. Let me now share with you some statistics on firearms. And I'm going to give you the numbers of firearms that we've recovered over the same 2017 to date period. In 2017, the members of the Barbados Police Service, it wasn't called that then, but you know what I mean, recovered 94 firearms in 2017. In 2018, they recovered 82 firearms. In 2019, police interdiction efforts netted 86 firearms. In 2020, 89 firearms were recovered. For the year 2021, 57 firearms were recovered. And for the period 1st January of this year to July 7th, the police have so far recovered 55 firearms. In fact, only yesterday, a successful police operation resulted in the seizure of a significant number of high-caliber handguns. The numbers that I've given you total 465 firearms recovered. And I hope you'll agree with me when I say that this is a huge amount of firearms to be taken off the streets of our country over this period. And while you could say that we need to do more, and that is always true, these are 465 firearms that cannot now be used by the criminal element to take the lives of Barbadians, whether young or old. I must also point out to you that over the period that I'm reviewing, many thousands of rounds of ammunition were also recovered. And this is important because guns are of no use without bullets. I share these figures on gun recovery and ammunition recovery to demonstrate, firstly, the extent of the firearm problem. If we can take 465 guns off the streets, and you know that we haven't got all. So that would tell you immediately that we are facing a serious challenge. But also to highlight to you what the service is doing about it. Everybody wants to know, what is the police doing? This is hard policing. This is a measure of the success story, both in the number of murders that they have solved and in the number of firearms that they have taken off the street. Let me repeat that number, ladies and gentlemen, 465 between 2017 and now. But even with all that we are doing, Barbadians have legitimate and reasonable questions and concerns. Where are the guns coming from? Who are involved? And what is causing this problem? Many commentators have weighed in on these issues, and it is clear that it requires a continued thorough analysis so that we understand always the many variables, including the causes. But what is particularly important is that we must resist the temptation to embark on knee-jerk reactions. And the Commissioner and his High Command and myself as Attorney General share this perspective. We cannot deal with these problems if we have recourse to knee-jerk reactions. Knee-jerk reactions will only result in treatment plans that are ineffective. On the other hand, interventions that are based on data, intelligence, and sound analysis is the far better approach. And this is the approach that my ministry and that law enforcement has taken. A full analysis of the data going over the years is ongoing. But we can say now, and perhaps we've always been able to say without fear of contradiction, that there are several strands to this problem and that no single factor will resolve it. Barbados does not manufacture guns. And this means, therefore, that illicit transportation and smuggling is a serious concern for us. Across the world, especially in our hemisphere, there are different legal systems. Some countries have weak border controls. But there are also the issues of different cultural practices around firearm use. You can immediately think of the United States, where there is a prevailing view that everybody should be entitled to have a firearm regardless of any risk that's associated or directed towards them. So these are all matters that affect how we receive firearms in Barbados, because if they're easily available in our other jurisdictions, then they are readily available for illicit importation and smuggling into Barbados. Ladies and gentlemen, while it is not a consolation, as I speak with you, every country in our sub-region is battling with the specter of increased firearm use. It's not a consolation, but it means that we have some common factors that are attending our societies. And I can reveal to you that only in the last few days, one RSS member state, and that is a member state of the regional security system made up of the OECS, Barbados, and now Guyana. One RSS member state has asked for assistance under the RSS treaty so as to be able to deal with their spike in vicious crime. And the commissioner has assured me that he's going to be able to lend that particular territory a few of our officers to be able to bolster their own policing efforts. I mention this to demonstrate the scale of the problem, but not at all to concede or to suggest that we have any inability to tackle it. The strategy that the enforcement agencies have adopted with the full support of government is based on initiatives to address the supply and demand for guns. On the supply side, there are a number of interventions that we've undertaken to reduce, eliminate, block opportunities, block methods of importation, and block the trafficking in guns. On the demand side, there are other state interventions that are directed towards reducing the demand. If we want to start with looking at the supply side and those things that we've done, some of them are well known to you. You will know that we've spent considerable amount of resources over the last few years to address coastal surveillance and to strengthen our detection systems at our ports of entry. To be candid, I have to tell you that there have been periods in the past when these assets have not been in working order and have not been in working order for extended periods of time, in some instances well over a year. Now, if our ability to detect firearms coming into Barbados is so significantly hampered because assets are out of use for a year and a half, then you can only imagine what number of guns could have come in at that time. In those circumstances, therefore, it has been a challenge for our law enforcement agencies, simply because at our ports of entry, our guard was significantly down. The other issue, and I can speak specifically about the scanners. You'll recall that when we came to government, there were no functioning scanners at our seaport. And we spent many, many millions of dollars to deal with that particular issue. But you must understand, too, that when the firearms come in, they're not consumed. It's not like potato chips. You're not eating it. Those firearms make their way on our streets. And once in the hands of criminals, you can be assured that they are items, hot items, that are traded and otherwise used to commit crime. We have also found institutional weaknesses across several departments of government. And I'm not going to expand on those, but I will say that we've been quietly and systematically addressing these issues without any public fanfare. But our institutions have accepted that there is strengthening which must take place in order for them to help us to fight these issues. Who is involved in committing firearm crime? I'm sure that you are seeing the many news stories, the court reports, and the images of individuals in the media who are brought before the courts. Immediately you recognize that they are in the main young men who fit a particular profile. But there are also enablers, people who are behind the scenes, people without a public face, who are the bedrock of the criminal endeavors. They're the ones who provide the resources, who provide the wherewithal, who provide the protection, who provide all that is needed for these young men who end up finding a way before the courts to do what they're doing in relation to crime generally, but firearm crimes in particular. These enablers are a source of quick and easy money for many of our young men and women, and in particular those from disadvantaged communities. And one experience of one of our community police officers was that he tried to enroll a large number of young men and women from his particular beat into the government's TVET program so that they could acquire skills and prepare for gainful employment. And it was met with total lack of interest. The reason? The enablers had got there first and were already providing these young people with what they considered to be easy money. But rest assured that these enablers have a day of reckoning coming. There are several factors that are associated with what causes our young men in particular to behave in such a manner that threatens public safety. And the sociologists, the criminologists have studied them, and we have an idea of what some of them are. But chief among them are such issues as lack of proper socialization, lack of active and positive community ties, and yes, sometimes pure criminality. What are we doing as a government? Over the last 4 years, we have embarked on a number of initiatives. And these initiatives, some are situational, and others address community blight and social conditions that engender antisocial behavior and crime. And we believe that there's empirical evidence to support our stance that effective criminal deterrence depends on 3 factors. But I'll come back to that. The fact is that as a government, we recognized that there was an issue, and we determined that we needed to have multiple approaches. Some of the ones that are immediately obvious will be to do with appointment of judges. When we came to government, there were 2 judges only sitting on the High Court bench. But what that meant was that there was never sufficient judicial capacity to get rid of the backlog. There are only so many criminal cases that 2 judges could do in any given year. We found almost 1,000 cases in the criminal assize bench that were waiting to be tried. And many of them were gun crimes, and a not insignificant number of them were homicides. We have increased that number to 5. And this increase in judges has already begun to produce dividends in terms of getting criminal trials through the system faster and more efficiently. We've also increased the number of prosecutors because you can't have additional 3 judges in the criminal bench and not enough prosecutors to prosecute the cases. So we've increased the number of prosecutors so that the stream of work flowing to the criminal courts is sustainable. And we're going to be appointing more. In relation to our support for the police, and Commissioner, I know that these issues cause you sleepless nights and all of your officers. And I also know that your officers make a tremendous amount of sacrifices to be able to keep pace with the requirements that are caused by these firearm crimes. But I'm happy to say that we've given the police every single thing that they've asked for. We've given them massive support, expenditure on equipment and expenditure on facilities. When we came to office in 2018, the annual police budget was $99 million. We've steadily increased that budget to today's $114 million in the face of COVID, in the face of having to deal with Hurricane Elsa, in the face of everything. We've made sure that we gave to the Barbados Police Force all of the financial resources that they needed. And they have responded well to this support. Almost every day, as you can tell, I'm briefed on gun seizures, and you will see the images that they share publicly from time to time. But then there are also the government's efforts to deal with the social conditions that are in our communities. We have a number of inner city communities that have said to us, we feel like we do not belong to Barbados. Their living conditions have been allowed to fall into a state of almost embarrassment. And we've taken a decision as to how we're going to deal with improving that housing. Things like drainage. These are communities that flood every time the rain falls. These are communities where the community centers have been shut up for years. They honestly feel that they do not belong in our country, that they are somehow second-class citizens. And when that happens, it engenders in those young men and women who grew up in those circumstances a feeling of hopelessness. And we've taken specific decisions and targeted decisions to try to deal with those issues. The Prime Minister has indicated that some of those inner city communities are going to receive a complete overhaul in relation to housing and things of that sort. We feel that when people have skin in the game, when people have housing that they want to protect, living conditions that they want to safeguard, then their approach to how they operate and how their children operate in our society is going to be different. In relation to this as well, we've also seen the efforts of the Ministry of Youth, Sport and Community Development. Minister Griffith has very recently indicated to the country a number of efforts that they're making in terms of providing working opportunities, providing training, providing additional sporting facilities. And my constituency in St. Joseph is benefiting as well. Programs to get our young men and women engaged in wholesome activity. That is part of making sure that they are properly socialized. Sports means a lot. We have a lot of our young men who, because of poor socialization, they don't know how to deal with conflict. They have a beef with somebody, and immediately they want to destroy life and limb. How many of us have played games and got run over on the football field or something, but we understand that there's a response that is appropriate and there's a response that's not appropriate. And unfortunately, what has become pervasive in many areas is a lot of poorly socialized young men and women. In relation to education, there are also initiatives, but the Ministry of People Empowerment has been spending a tremendous amount of its resources on saving vulnerable families, because the vulnerable families are those that present their young people as easy fodder for the criminal element. They're not properly taken care of at home, and so they run to the arms, more or less, of a criminal element that welcomes them and appears to treat them in a certain kind of way. You will therefore discern that government interventions are targeted and they're well thought out. And I assure you that they will be pursued with determination. But in all of this, there must be a sense of realism, and we have to accept that we have a role to play. The situation of gun crime did not develop overnight. And there are no three-point plans, there are no immediate solutions to turn this thing around. It requires a steady hand, it requires a long-term commitment. For those individuals who anticipated that there'd be an immediate elimination, that is far from the case. Now, I know that in the political arena, pot shots are thrown, and I see people saying, well, you know, when you had the last AG, you said this and you said that. The one difference between this government and that last occasion is the commitment that we have given to the force, the commitment that we've given to the country, and the commitment that we are backing up by our resources. We have always said that the first call on public expenditure has to be law and order and citizen safety. So you will note that government is doing a lot of heavy lifting with the many measures that we've put in place. You've seen us, you've seen them, you've heard us talk about them. We are trying to rescue our communities. And these responses will go a long way. But we have to acknowledge that until we put significant personal effort in dealing with our families and our own communities, we will find that in another 20 years we'll be back to square one. All of the solutions do not lie with government intervention. The first interveners are ourselves. And if we abdicate that responsibility and decide that we're going to leave the safety of our streets to the police service and to the government, then that is not a solution. We are committed, we are absolutely determined to ensure the safety of Barbadians. And if I can remind you, during COVID, we adopted a whole of country approach. Everybody had a stake in this. We had to protect ourselves, we had to protect our families and our neighbors, and collectively we were able to protect our country. We have to accept that dealing with firearm crimes requires a similar approach, a whole of country approach, not a whole of government approach. Governments do not raise children, plain and simple. Governments do not live in communities. We do. The government is committed to doing its part, but I call on all Barbadians to recognize that with all of the work that the government does, if each of us does not recognize that we have a significant role to play in rooting out some of these challenges, then we will get nowhere. There are those who are calling to hear what government strategy is going forward. Much of that strategy has been outlined by us through the estimates. What are those things that we are doing to save vulnerable families? What are those things that we're doing to save communities? Keeping people employed. The Commissioner recently spoke about the connection between poverty and crime. And we have moved mountains to keep thousands and thousands of Barbadians employed during a difficult time, and during a time that if we had not put those measures in place, it would have been oh so easy for them to have recourse to a different set of behavior. And even though you want us to be open about developments and trends and so on, the fact is that there will always be elements of our crime prevention strategy that we will never share. But understand that if you are in a boxing match, you do not tell the person you're fighting with which punch you are going to throw next. And I'm sorry to put it in those terms, but for those who are calling, I want to hear the strategy. The strategy has been laid out time and time again. We are making sure that the Barbados Police Service is best in class. We've invested vast amounts of money in training, and that training continues, Commissioner, into this year and into every year, because we're making sure that a deficiency that has prevailed for quite some time is solved. We're giving our police service all of the technology that they need, all that they have asked for. Everything that will make the police service the best force in the region has been provided to them. Those are all elements of the strategy. Making sure that our judicial system is responsive and works, that is a difficult one, but I assure you that it is being worked on assiduously. We are getting rid of some of that backlog of crime. One particular judge only deals with firearm crimes, Mr. Justice Graves. When we only had 2 judges on the criminal bench, there was no way you could adopt that kind of approach. So don't expect us to tell you what our strategy is, but be assured that there are some elements that we will, there are things that are happening, but there will always be some things that, in terms of details of our strategy, that we will not share with you. A word of warning to our young men, because they're all young men, who by their action have been threatening our public safety. Your numbers are few. The people of Barbados are many. You cannot and will not win. You will not be allowed to drive Barbadians into their homes and away from their normal pursuits out of some fear that you have our streets and our communities hijacked with guns. You few villains will not be allowed to make any further inroads into our communities. You will not be allowed to take over our streets. You will not be allowed to disrupt our daily lives and our livelihood. I assure you, as I assure every Barbadian, that every single resource at the disposal of the government will be brought to bear against you, and you are warned not to test or resolve. This is not a response to a spike. A spike, as I said, is a sharp increase over a short period of time. But this is a general response to those individuals who feel that it is all right to parade around Barbados at a fete with a gun. It is our response to those individuals who care nothing about life. It is our response to individuals who feel it is all right to go into a community and start shooting. Not a response to the spike, but a response to you individuals who seem hell-bent on lawlessness. I'd like to invite our commissioner to say a few words at this point. Oh, I see. That was the strategy.
Yeah. Good afternoon, everyone. Commissioner of Police Richard Boyce. I want to underscore one or two points which were made by the Attorney General. And my first message, I must say, is that violence, especially firearm-enabled violence, will not be tolerated. And that is the message I would like to send to those persons who are out there in possession of firearms. It is not the Barbadian way of life. It was never the Barbadian culture. So I want to re-emphasize that message, that wherever those guns are, the members of the Barbados Police Service will be out and about taking those weapons out of those persons' hands. So that is my first clarion call to persons, especially those young persons between the ages of 19 and 35 who are well bent on committing that sort of fear in persons' mind. What I must say is that the quality of life for persons in Barbados must be at its best. Persons must be allowed to move freely about communities, doing their businesses, whether it's school, whether it is having a lime, football, wherever it is. Persons must go unimpeded and relaxing in their way of living, their mode of living about. So I can assure the Barbadian public that the officers in the Barbados Police Service would be looking after their welfare, their safety, their comfort, and that is the remit of our officers. Day and night, 24 hours per day, that is our intent in dealing with this firearm crime. Now, the aspect of how we are treating to these firearm incidents, we have done the analysis. We know where our weak points are. We know where our strong points are. Now, I must say that we are fighting the firearm issue downstream. Downstream in the sense that firearms are not produced in Barbados. Our method is a second or third tier intervention. The first aspect of the whole firearm issue is the source area. And the source areas are outside of our control, that is in other countries. So what we will be doing is speaking to and looking at how we can best prepare for this firearm issue. Now, the whole aspect of moving into dealing with this firearm issue, and that is why our men and women in the Barbados Police Service must be so involved and active. We have to look and see what is going to happen in the very near future. In fact, it's happening all right now. People will be aware that we are in the area and focus of the crop over period. And that is where we have a very high active public movement here and there. A person must be willing to go about their places without that fear, being threatened, harmed, or otherwise, whether it is firearm or whatever the violence is. But I can assure the public that we in the Barbados Police Service will be with them out in the field, moving to and fro, making sure that all areas, especially where these crop-over events are being heard, whether it's music, whether it's dancing, whatever it is, and whether they are being put on performance-wise, our men and women will be in their numbers out in the field and making sure and making people feel safe and secure in those type of environments and situations. So that is what I can tell the public. Yes, we are ready. Our numbers are engaged. We are in that mode for giving that quality police service to all members of the public. So those are issues that I would speak to and alert persons. Thank you very much.
We'll now take a few questions.
Mr. Attorney General.
Age.
We'll be here, no problem.
Well, I didn't say they were beauty, I just say age.
Emmanuel Joseph from Barbados today. Much of what was said this morning and into this afternoon had to do with after the fact. We had a whole set of stats on what has happened after the guns have arrived, and very little about what is happening at our borders or ports of entry in terms of the guns arriving. Nothing about that in terms of, have you been seizing any guns at the port? Let's go back to 2019. Permit me with the former commissioner of police used the word corruption, and he said that there were officers at the border, and he's not talking about police officers, who were involved in corruption in terms of the guns coming in, and he called on the good ones to call out the bad ones. I want us to focus on what is exactly happening at our ports in terms of stopping the guns from actually reaching our streets.
Couple of things have been happening. I'm glad you asked for this particular perspective. But before I get to that, let me just say, part of our strategy involves dealing with our source markets. And I suppose it's a curious thing to call an illegal product to say that it has a source market, but I should perhaps say source country. And we have settled on an MOU with certain specialized United States agencies to do a number of things which will assist in our mutual ability to deal with the illegal trafficking of firearms. Obviously, you've seen in the press a number of stories in relation to firearm traffickers in the U.S. We are intent that we are put in a position to be better able to deal with those things in a cross-border way. We're also going to be, as a result of that MOU, looking at increased training of our customs officers. Believe me, we know that the criminal element is extremely resourceful, okay? And there are certain characteristics of firearms that they rely on. They know they can be taken apart. They ship them in multiple things. And what is important to us is to make sure that our officers or border protection agencies are fully able to spot them when they see them. In relation to, so that will take care of training and cross-border cooperation, and we're looking forward to having that particular MOU signed with those specialist U.S. agencies. The commissioner has signed off on it, and it has gone back to the U.S. Embassy, and that has to come into play from there. In relation to statements made about individuals at our ports of entry, I'm going to be careful in my response. I do not imagine that there is any segment of the Barbadian society that does not have some bad apples in it. Any. Of tremendous importance to us is how we deal with those bad apples. One of the things that the government is trying to wrestle to the ground is the issue of truth verification, also known as polygraphing. We have settled on a CARICOM policy for polygraphing so that individuals who work in specialized areas, individuals who have certain levels of seniority, are required to do truth verification to certain levels across the board. We are trying to come to reach an accord with the various unions to be able to fully implement that truth verification strategy across our service, our public service. The fact is that if you are subject to truth verification, to polygraphing, then it allows us to be able to decide where we put whom, to weed out one person or the next. The police service regularly does truth verification on its members, and I've asked them to heighten it. There are parts of government where you do not get hired today unless you first go through a polygraph test, okay? But the international strategy, the international standard has been that as long as you're working in certain sensitive agencies, you have to subject yourself to a polygraph, a truth verification test, so as to be able to protect the integrity of the system. So I acknowledge that there have been defects. Some of those defects have been recognized. Some of those defects have been exposed. The work continues. You asked the question, are we intercepting any of these guns at the port? The answer, sir, is yes, we are. Can we do more? Probably. But it requires a combined approach between the Barbados Police Service, the Customs Department, the administration at the port, the administration of the airport. So all of these are inputs into our ability to successfully deal with the issues. We know, for example, that people have shipped firearms into Barbados through our courier services. Doesn't make the courier service bad. It just means that there are certain institutional weaknesses that we have to identify and we have to eliminate. And that work continues. Let me assure you, Emmanuel, this is a constant battle. It's like healthcare. You gotta take care of it every single day. You don't deal with it now, and you know that you're covered for all eternity. Every single day, the criminal element finds a new strategy. We have to spot it, we have to respond, we have to head it off. So I acknowledge that there have been difficulties. I will not even pretend that those difficulties would not still be there. But I will say to you that the agencies are working in a collaborative way, and I believe that the situation may not be perfect, but I believe that we are reaping rewards.
Yes, Carver Munzi from Nation News. Now, my question is directed to pretty much, well, I have a few questions, but they'll be directed to pretty much anyone at the table that's willing to take these. Now, are we any closer in determining the causal link in this current spate of shootings? By that I mean, for example, what has the expiration of the gang-related link turned up at this point?
Yes, thanks for the question. I must say that the last three murders, I must say, we have our A-team investigators on them. And because of that, we were able to make some strong headway into at least one of them so far, which is encouraging. The other two, that is, the one occurs at the Screw Dock in Cabins Lane. We are also very deeply involved in that, and that too, we are making headway. We are connecting the dots, I must say. So things are also moving good in that area. I can tell you that, yes, we see light at the end of the tunnel where those matters are concerned. But it is too early to say more because we are at a delicate stage of the investigations at this time. So to go any further would probably shoot ourselves in our foot. So they will have to pull back where that is concerned.
And then a second question from me. Now, we had a period of quiet during the curfews. And obviously, no one is suggesting that we could have kept those curfews forever. However, while we maintain those restrictions, is it the case that what we are now seeing played out during those restrictions is a case where those levels of gun violence were pretty much on pause during the curfews? And let me premise that question and provide some further context by this follow-up question. If the answer is yes, does this amplify the current problem, as we would essentially be dealing with rising statistic in a shorter time period?
So, you know, we had a lot of discussion about the impact of the curfews. There have been periods of time when the curfew was tight. There are other times when we had levels of relaxation. That would require significant study. But, you know, I will say that any time that movement is going to be diminished, there will be less opportunity for some of these things to take place. That is a fact. But I also want to say that on the other side, I do not know that some of the brazen people that we have in our society who engage in criminal activity care too much about the fact that there's a curfew. A man who is prepared to go into a public place and shoot somebody, either in broad daylight or at night, is hardly likely to be affected by the fact that, well, you know, we have a COVID curfew, so I'm not going to engage in criminal behavior. The jury is out. What I will say, though, is we always knew that we would come back to a state of normalcy, or the COVID restrictions could never have continued. All across the world, they've been relaxed. We now are at a stage where we have very minimal restrictions. It is possible, in fact, you may say it's likely that because of the fact that people are moving around more, doing more things, going to parties, there are opportunities now for robberies, for example, that did not exist before because people were staying home. I hope I get the essence of your question, and if I haven't, please repeat it. But I will say that Barbados is not a curfew-minded state. The Prime Minister of our sister Trinidad and Tobago only this week floated the possibility of treating violence as a public health issue and wondered whether he should not declare a state of emergency on the basis of public health in Trinidad. Now, I'm sure that lawyers will have a field day about the constitutionality of it, but near every time you open a paper, there's a curfew in Jamaica, some part of Jamaica or another. That is not where Barbados is, and I want to remind you that we are not at a place where there is out and out lawlessness. We are not. The numbers, and it's not a numbers game, but I don't think in 2019 when we had 48 murders, over 30 of them were by firearm, nobody was talking about the prospect of shutting down the country so as to be able to dampen that. In 2017, you had 30 murders, and of those, 72% were by firearm. So I can say to you as Attorney General that while we look for the correlation in everything, certainly if this is where you're going, it is not the view of the Barbados government that we are in a place where we need to resort to curfew to deal with a spike. This is a spike. It is a sharp increase over a 2-week period, not a state of out-and-out lawlessness.
No, actually, I wasn't suggesting that a return to the curfew would be in order. What I was questioning our statistics, our 17 murders in this period, given the fact that during the period of the curfew was, some might argue, was essentially discounted given those restrictions that were in place. are we dealing with a rising statistic in a shorter time frame?
I don't think that we're in a position to say that at this point. It'd be better able to say that at the end of the year when we see what the numbers for the year are. But in 2020, where we were deep in the curfew. 2020, that's when we shut down for COVID. In 2020, we had 40 homicides, and that is when as of March 27th, Barbadians had to stay within my now popular word curtilage, couldn't go anywhere. We were shut down for 75% of 2020 and still managed to get homicide rates in the 40s. So we have to wait and see. I maintain though that this is a sharp increase over a short period of time. At the end of the year, we'll be better able to say whether there's any correlation.
Adri, Shane
Yes,
Jones
please.
from CBC. You guys reiterated the point that you're fighting it downstream, that a lot of the things happen overseas territories, and what we can do is what we can manage when it gets here. You also indicated that our assets, that you call them to detect the guns coming in, some of them have had issues, some of them being
In the past.
for over a year and a half.
In the
over a year
past.
and a half. This has not been in the last 4 years?
No.
Oh.
Now, when we came to government, we found that there was no working scanner at the port for 18 months. It took us a while because we had to purchase additional scanning capacity, but that we spent millions of dollars at the start of an MF program to make that investment and also to bolster other security measures at our ports of entry, and we believe it has reaped dividends. But at no time since we installed these scanners did you have any extended period of them being down. There may have been once or twice when it might have been out for a day because of a technological glitch, but the servicing team would have come in and wrapped it up. But I'm sorry, I just got ahead of you. I don't think you finished your question.
No problem. So that's good. Commissioner, from what you have seen, when we saw the murder in Long Gatson Phillip a few days ago,
Long Bay.
in Long Bay, yeah. From the result from the responses and some of the reports we've been hearing from the people in the area, it seems like if the shooters went in there, shot wildly. The owner said somebody went in the bathroom, shot somebody, went outside, shot somebody. Is there any fear that, and it reminds us of some of the reports we have been seeing from international media in terms of mass shootings, when there's no apparent real target. Is there any fear of any copycats? Barbadians now seeing things and are shooting people just wild and willy-nilly?
No, nothing to suggest such mass shooting intent in Barbados. We did our early analysis of what occurred, and there's nothing to link it to what is happening in the U.S. of A and other countries. Nothing so far.
Mr. Attorney General, question?
Oh, sorry. Oh, I thought it was called again. Go ahead.
Ricardo Roberts from Starcom.
Yes.
You almost sound the same.
Yeah, you do.
Ricardo Roberts from Starcom Network. Your response to a statement that the DLP president, Dr. Yearwood, made about the government not placing priority on the issue of crime over the most recent period. Your response to that?
I think it is plainly inaccurate. It doesn't gel with what we know we've been doing. I've just pointed out to you that we've steadily increased the police budget to $114 million this financial year. Okay? This financial year. Now, if you think about the fact that other ministries have had their budgets slashed, they've had their budget slashed. Prime Minister's made it clear, we can't afford this, we can't afford that, we can't afford that. But the Barbados Police Service has had, I believe, this is probably its second highest budget allocation ever in its history. So that fact alone would demonstrate, and that's not money going for salaries, that fact alone would demonstrate that we are taking and have always taken the issue of crime prevention seriously. Now, I have to say, when we were in opposition, I certainly called for greater dialogue. We've always dialogued on the issue of crime, and I hope that an opportunity would arise for us to have that discussion with the leader of the opposition. But, well, sorry, shouldn't call him that, should I? The leader of the Democratic Labour Party. But let me remind you, President, that in 2019, it could even have been 2018, we took the unprecedented decision that we would brief all of Parliament, give all of Parliament a national security brief, give the leader of the opposition and his senators a national security brief, and that we would also take all the senior public servants into our confidence and give them a national security briefing, because we recognize that this was not to be a political issue, and that we could not go forward in fighting crime if we were the only people who felt we had something at stake. And we had that discussion then with Bishop Atherley. He got, the first time an opposition leader has ever in our history got a full national security briefing, something that's unheard of. So I hear Dr. Yearwood. I almost anticipate that is what he would say, but I don't think that the facts on the ground, the equipment that we're giving the police service, all of these other things that we're doing could even remotely demonstrate that we are not taking the issue of crime seriously. And I'm happy to talk with him if he wants.
Actually, he did extend it.
The AG,
He extended an invitation to me?
Yeah.
That's very kind of him.
Mr. AG, let's take you back to a statement you made. You said the enablers have a day of reckoning coming.
Yes, sir.
And you described them as faceless. It sounds like something that I've heard before, in the sense that...
Tell me where and when.
Well, I
Not
said
from
it
me.
sounds like something I've heard before.
Okay.
But my question is this just a wish of yours, or is this something you have some sort of evidence or some information that would make you come to that conclusion, that you soon from now or whenever you can put your hands on these enablers?
Listen, I have had the privilege of being Attorney General on 2 occasions. No. If there's one thing that has been a constant, is the fact that investigations are painstaking, time-consuming, and expensive operations. This is Senior Superintendent David Griffith, and he can tell you that occasionally, if you're lucky, you will have a break, and you will, in a matter of days or so, be able to say this one is solved, that one is solved. And we have a high clearance rate in relation to murders, okay? But let us not fool ourselves. The kind of enablers that we are talking about are those individuals who are operating or trying to operate anonymously, who are operating behind the veil. But let me be frank with you. When you see that there's a shooting, okay, and you say, well, they have got this man and he's been charged with the shooting, and you say, well, that one is done, the police's job is not done, because they know only too well that you may have caught, they've caught the shooter, but the person or the system or the crime apparatus that spawned that shooter, or the crime apparatus that is behind that shooter, because often those shooters are disposable, they're dispensable, they're the end of a criminal line. So when they get caught, the police know that they still have a major undertaking trying to dismantle the system that spawned him. So I'm not telling you that we have Al Capone and that kind of thing in Barbados, but the fact is that we know that they are call them gangs, call them whatever you want to call them, okay? But often the people that do these things and that are caught, they're the ones at the end of the tale. So you may say, yes, we've captured this guy, that murder is solved, but what is it that spawned the murder? Who did he shoot that person on whose behalf did he shoot that person? So this is not wishful thinking, but I don't want to go in details. The fact is that there's a lot more that happens behind the scenes, and I'm just making it clear that to the public, because it's important that they know, but I'm also making it clear to those people that their day of reckoning will come. But investigations are slow, they're painstaking, and we have to use every method that is available to be able to get where we need to go. I don't want to say anything more than that.
Before we go on, just note we'll have 2 more questions and then we will wrap up.
Okay. One other question from me. You want to have a question as well?
Commissioner, or when you dispensing questions? That's
I thought-
my job. You let me dispense. Go ahead, Colin.
Yes, sir. The commissioner would have mentioned that and gave the assurance that persons attending crop over this year are safe. There's nothing to the police presence would be there. But we must admit that there is a pervading sense of fear now as we go deeper into the crop over season. What specifics, without obviously, I don't know how you're gonna juggle this act, but what specifics can you give us without revealing too much strategy of the plan of action to ensure that persons are safe, that can make persons have that sense that when they go to these events, they will be totally safe? What can you tell us?
If it is one thing that the Barbados Police Service can say, is the aspect of trust, reliability, and confidence in the men and women of the Barbados Police Service. And the history will show that over time we have delivered quality policing at those types of events. And we are well trained, we have the experience, and we can say upfront that we were preparing for such events for over a period of time. So we know where to put our resources, how to go about our planning, what strategies to put in place, and to be there upfront before any activity begins. So we will do the necessary environmental scanning, knowing exactly what is happening and put the resources and the specifics in place to ensure the public that we are on the job and we are alert and we are attuned to everything that is happening in terms of providing that high level of quality, service, and security to members of the public during crop over.
Even in a scenario where we have an unprecedented splintered crop over this year.
Very much so. From the inset, or the outset, I must say, from the outset, when it was mentioned to us, we went to our boardroom, put our heads together, and look at the best way we can police crop over, and we look at all the scenarios, so we're well prepared for any eventuality that might come about.
And if I can add, I mean, you know, the police service has been a critical partner in the entire process. So it is not a case where determinations were made and then they got a call saying, well, you know, we're doing crop over in multiple locations here, so get yourself ready. They have been involved in every single element of it. And, you know, I too have that confidence. The Barbados Police Service has been policing crop over for years. They've been policing visits by all kinds of dignitaries, presidents, royal family, whoever. Every instance will always throw up a few different things, but if you want to look at it this way, in 2020, when we had the 41 murders, crop over was still safe. Crop over was still safe. So I look forward to enjoying crop over like everybody else, and I enjoy the confidence, I believe, of the police service in doing what their job is. But I also want to say that the promoters have an important role to play in a lot of these things, and everybody tries to cut costs and so on. But, you know, please, I would say to them, please don't just put the entire burden on the police service, especially those private events. Make sure that you do what you need to do to make your patrons safe. But I also want to say that there have been some WhatsApp messages floating around that have come to the attention of the police. Every threat is taken seriously. Every threat to public safety is taken seriously. But at the same time, we don't want Barbadians to develop a siege mentality or to become hysterical over every little thing. The police are on the job, they're doing the job. You take care of your own safety, but please do not go into a state of hysteria because some mischievous WhatsApp message going around. The police take every single one of them serious, and they follow every thread to the ground.
Yeah, Mr. AJ, I know you said that most of the crime issues have enablers behind it, and
I didn't say most, or I'm just simply saying that
right.
behind those
Right.
those individuals, we know that
We know
they're
that
enablers. Yes.
and somehow, and this could be true in many countries that
Without doubt.
the enablers are untouchable. Is there a sense from the how to put it? Is the government or the police going to take an aggressive approach in nipping these elements at the bud, which are really enabling the crime situation in the country? Is there going to be an aggressive approach to deal with that?
Not is there going to be. This is not something in futuro. This is something that is already in train. But I want to reiterate, sir, that these things require painstaking, highly confidential, diligent application. The commissioner said that his 18 investigators, that's a big number, no? That's not the kind of number you've ever heard before. On these 3 homicides alone, he has 18 investigators dealing with nothing else, day and night. Okay? And add to that all of the other things, because you still need police officers to be at all the crop-over events. They have to be at the court, they have to drive judges, they have to be downstairs. So we have a force of just over 1,200 people. But while we may not be able to throw vast amounts of resources at particular issues of any kind, rest assured that that work is going on. Okay, well, ladies and gentlemen, let me thank you very much for joining us. I think this is an important occasion for us. It's important for us to talk to Barbadians. It's important for them to understand some of the issues that face us. I think at the end of the day, Barbadians are reasonable people and expect reasonable responses. And the government, I'm satisfied, the government that I am involved, I'm a part of, has been delivering those reasonable responses. I want to ask again that Barbadians recognize that individually and collectively they have skin in this game, and they have to join with us and help us to protect our families, our societies, our homes. The next person that gets shot might be one of us, might be one of you. Are we doing something to make sure that that risk is minimized? The Barbados Police Service has been doing an amazing job, and perhaps my final comment would be to say, Commissioner, on behalf of all of Barbados, let me thank you, your men and women, the civilian staff of the service, for serving us diligently in the way that you have in difficult circumstances. And I want all of Barbados to respond to that hard work by taking the police into their confidence and working with them wherever possible to make sure that we get a good result. Thank you.